Picture the scene for a second. You are standing in the dusty, the suffocating heat of a first-century Galilean valley. And there's this massive crowd, right? They've formed this tight ring around a terrified father and his son who is just violently convulsing on the ground.
Yeah, absolute chaos.
Exactly. And right in the center of all this chaos are the local exorcists. These are guys steeped in the traditions of the day, burning pungent roots, waving amulets, reciting, all these elaborate incantations.
Doing everything they know how to do.
Right. And they're desperately trying to interrogate this demon to discover its name. Because, well, in the first century, if you didn't know the spirit's name, you essentially had zero leverage.
Nothing, yeah.
But there's a massive problem. The demon is deaf and mute, so the boy can't hear the questions and he can't speak the answers. The exorcists are completely powerless, and the crowd knows it.
It's just this total, terrifying realization of human impotence.
Yes, exactly. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a deep dive into the absolute, devastating insolvency of human power. I'm your host, and we are going to unpack this incredible text today.
And I'm thrilled to be here. We're dissecting one of the most jarring, complex, and really just theologically loaded narratives in the New Testament. We're looking at Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 29.
The healing of the demon-possessed boy.
That's the one. And our guides for today's deep dive are two incredibly rigorous theological essays. The first is called The Sovereign Majesty of Christ over demonic oppression and unbelief, and the second is When Faith Meets the Impossible, Christ and Prayer.
And what I love about these sources is they don't just gloss over the surface.
Oh, not at all. They plunge us right into the Greek syntax, the bizarre world of Second Temple Jewish exorcism, and the covenantal theology operating beneath the text.
Which is exactly what we want. The mission for us today is to strip away all that glossy self-help moralism that, let's be real, usually coats our reading of these passages.
Yeah, we tend to sanitize it.
We really do. But today, we are going to examine the collision between uncreated divine glory and total human bankruptcy. And I think this matters so much for you listening right now, because every single one of us eventually hits a wall, right?
Absolutely. You hit a crisis where your personal techniques, your past experiences, they just aren't enough to carry you through.
Right. And this text provides the ultimate answer to that human helplessness. But to even begin to understand the sheer force of this collision, we have to look at the structural architecture of Mark's gospel.
Yeah, you can't just drop into verse 14 and expect to grasp the magnitude of the crisis. You have to zoom out.
So let's zoom out. Mark is often treated as, like, the action movie of the Gospels, right? Because he's constantly using the word immediately.
Right, immediately this, immediately that. It moves so fast.
But the sources reveal this highly calculated theological blueprint underneath that rapid pace. The gospel is actually cleanly severed into two halves.
It's a brilliant structure. Chapters 1 through 8 function as the presentation of the servant king in Galilee. He is a conqueror.
He's just dominating everything.
Exactly. He demonstrates absolute authority over the physical realm, calming seas, healing diseases, and casting out demons by the thousands. He is gathering these massive crowds.
It's basically an unbroken trajectory of public triumph.
It really is. But then you hit the theological hinge of the entire book, which happens at Caesarea Philippi in Mark 8.
Right, where Peter makes the confession, "You are the Christ."
Yes, and the moment those words leave his mouth, the entire trajectory of the gospel violently shifts. The compass abruptly points to Jerusalem.
So he goes from this triumphant servant king to the suffering servant.
Exactly. From Mark 8 onward, he begins to relentlessly predict his rejection, his torture, and his resurrection. He is deliberately walking toward the cross.
Okay, so that brings us to our specific passage. It drops into the narrative immediately following the most, staggering event on that journey to Jerusalem.
The Transfiguration. Mark 9, verses 2 through 13.
Right. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a high mountain. The sources point to Mount Hermon, towering thousands of feet above sea level.
And up there, it's like time and space just seem to fracture. Jesus' humanity is temporarily pulled back to reveal his uncreated pre-incarnate glory.
The text says, his garments become dazzling white, like radiant with a celestial light. Moses and Elijah just step out of eternity into the present.
And the voice of the Father thunders from the cloud. It is total, unadulterated, divine order and majesty.
Which is mind-blowing. But then Mark constructs this deliberate literary X-pattern, a chiasm.
Yeah, Mark is a master of theological juxtaposition. He forces the reader to look at the blinding, transcendent glory of Mount Hermon, and then,
Without even giving anyone a chance to catch their breath.
right, he plunges the narrative straight down into the dust, tragedy, and demonic chaos of the sin-cursed valley below.
He's contrasting the highest heights of heavenly reality with the lowest depths of human ruin.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. It's like coming back from the most profound spiritual retreat of your life, where everything feels clear and perfect, and walking straight into a chaotic Monday morning office crisis.
Yeah, but on a cosmic, eternal scale.
Exactly. But you have to ask, why not just let them stay on the mountain? Peter actually suggests that.
Oh, that's true. He wants to build tents and just camp out in the glory.
Right. I mean, if the goal of Christ is to reveal his divinity, staying on Mount Hermon wrapped in uncreated light seems like a pretty solid strategy.
So Mark's deliberate forcing of the narrative back down into the muck, as it'd be making a specific point, right?
The sources argue that this geographical descent is basically the incarnation in miniature. Christ fundamentally belongs to the realm of heavenly glory.
But he refuses to hoard it.
Exactly. He does not remain detached in pristine isolation while his creation suffers. The theology Mark is driving home is that true divine glory is not found in avoiding the mess of the fall, but in deliberately invading it.
Man, that's powerful. He descends into the valley of the shadow of death to execute a redemptive mission. But let me push back a little here. Why include the crowd and the arguments?
What?
Why not just have Jesus immediately heal the boy? What does all the chaos add to Mark's point?
Well, the sources answer that by pointing out that the chaos is specifically designed to highlight a catastrophic public failure.
The failure of Jesus' own inner circle.
Precisely. Let's look at the specific dynamics of the chaos in verse 14. Jesus, Peter, James, and John walk down, and they find a massive crowd surrounding the other 9 disciples.
And when the crowd spots Jesus, Mark uses this really fascinating word to describe their reaction. Exanthenes.
Yes, exanthenes. It's an incredibly potent, rare Greek verb. It is practically unique to Mark.
It doesn't just mean they were surprised or happy to see him, does it?
Not at all. It carries the weight of a visceral, awestruck alarm, a profound, almost terrifying shock. Some commentators suggest there might have been a lingering physical radiance on Jesus' face, much like Moses descending Sinai.
Oh, wow. Like his face was literally glowing.
Yeah, some argue that. But structurally, the crowd is overwhelmed by the sheer, jarring contrast of the authoritative creator stepping into a scene of utter, humiliating defeat.
And those 9 disciples who were left behind in the valley, they are locked in this vicious argument. The text uses syzetauntas, indicating a relentless, heated dispute.
And their opponents are the scribes. These are the legal scholars, the antagonistic defenders of rabbinic tradition.
They are essentially the theologians who have been stalking Jesus, looking for any fracture in his ministry to exploit.
Right, and Jesus steps into this theological street fight and asks what they are arguing about. But before the scribes or the humiliated disciples can even formulate a defense, the desperate father of the boy steps out of the crowd.
And he delivers the indictment that sets up the entire crisis of this deep dive. He explains his son is possessed by a violent, deaf, and mute spirit. He says he brought the boy to the disciples, and then he drops the hammer. And they were not able.
Uk ishisan. They had no strength. The verb ishi refers to possessing physical or spiritual capability.
So to declare uk ishchisan is to declare total insolvency.
Absolutely. The sources heavily emphasize this point. The disciples weren't just having an off day. They were exposed as completely, thoroughly bankrupt in the face of this specific demonic stronghold.
We really need to flesh out why this specific demonic stronghold was so impossible, because it explains why the scribes were hovering around like vultures. Exorcism was a massive industry in first-century Judaism, right?
They were huge. This crowd had seen people cast out demons before. It wasn't a novelty.
Okay, so they were used to this.
Far from a novelty, yeah. First-century Second Temple Judaism possessed an incredibly complex, highly superstitious framework for spiritual warfare. The sources pull from extra-biblical texts to paint this picture.
Like what kind of text?
If you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls from the Qumran community or pseudepigraphal writings or later Talmudic treatises, you see a culture completely obsessed with magical protocols.
That's so foreign to us.
Yeah.
What did a standard Jewish exorcism actually look like back then?
It was a highly theatrical ritual. The historian Josephus actually records witnessing a Jewish man named Eleazar casting out a demon in the presence of the Roman Emperor Vespasian.
Wait, in front of the emperor.
Yes. And according to Josephus, Eleazar put a ring containing a specific magical root, often identified as the root of Baras, to the nostrils of the demoniac.
To his nostrils?
Yeah, he literally drew the demon out through the man's nose and then commanded the spirit to knock over a basin of water a short distance away just to prove it had actually left.
That is wild. So they are relying on physical props.
Yeah.
Rings, roots, herbs.
Physical props and esoteric knowledge. The Testament of Solomon, a pseudepigraphal text detailing Jewish magical traditions, describes King Solomon allegedly forcing demons to build the temple by interrogating them.
Interrogation, I feel like that's a huge key here.
It is the absolute crux of the rabbinic method. Jewish tradition mandated that an exorcist had to force the demon to reveal its name. The name granted the exorcist leverage.
So if you invoked the name of a patriarch or a powerful angel and bound the specific name of the demon, you could expel it.
Exactly. But that exposes the trap in our text. The Father explicitly states the demon is a deaf and dumb spirit, enuma alalon.
Which renders the rabbinic protocol entirely useless.
Completely useless. You cannot interrogate a spirit that prevents its host from speaking or hearing. According to the scribes, this wasn't just a difficult case, it was a theologically impossible one.
The demon was basically insulated against all their Jewish exorcism techniques.
Yep. So the scribes are watching the disciples smash their heads against an impossible wall, and they're using it to mock the entire Jesus movement.
They are essentially saying, your rabbi's authority is just a localized parlor trick. He can handle the low-level stuff, but the moment you encounter a truly impenetrable darkness, his power evaporates.
It is a deliberate public humiliation of Christ's kingdom.
But hold on, here's where it gets really interesting to me. The timeline makes no sense here. Let's rewind to Mark chapter 6.
Okay, yeah.
Jesus sent these exact same men out, 2 by 2. He gave them authority over unclean spirits, and the text explicitly records that they went out and successfully cast out many demons.
They had a proven track record.
They knew what they were doing. It's like an elite athlete relying on last year's championship trophy to win today's game without doing the current training. Are the sources suggesting the disciples were treating their delegated authority like a magical, independent superpower rather than a dependent gift?
That is exactly what they're suggesting. They didn't forget their past success. Their past success was actually the poison that caused their current failure.
Wow.
The sources argue that disciples had confused delegated authority with autonomous power. It's like a franchise owner who runs a highly successful storefront for a massive corporation.
Oh, I like this analogy.
They have the branding, the uniforms, the store layout. But one day, the franchise owner decides they are the actual source of the success, and they cut off communication with the parent company's supply chain.
So they keep opening the doors every morning, wearing the uniform, going through the motions.
And they are absolutely baffled when the shelves go empty. They forgot they were just distributors, not creators.
That captures the theological reality perfectly. The disciples assumed the authority they wielded in Mark 6 was a permanent possession, a superpower they had unlocked.
They treated ministry as a technique rather than a posture of relentless, continuous dependence on the Creator. They walked up to this deaf and mute demon relying entirely on the fumes of yesterday's grace.
And when Jesus realizes this, when he sees the scribes mocking, the disciples humiliated, and the Father weeping, his response is honestly terrifying.
It really is. He doesn't pull the 9 aside for a gentle, therapeutic debrief. He explodes.
Right. He cries out, "Oh, faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you?" Genia pistos.
It is a stunning display of holy lament. And to understand the weight of genia pistos, the sources trace that specific Greek phrasing straight back to the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament.
Jesus is directly echoing the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32, verse 20.
Yes. And the context of Deuteronomy 32 is crucial here. It is the ultimate covenantal indictment. Moses is at the end of his life, recounting the history of the wilderness generation.
God had split the sea, drowned the Egyptian army, and fed the Israelites with bread from heaven.
Yet, the moment they faced a new trial, they immediately accused God of bringing them into the desert to kill them. In Deuteronomy 32, Jehovah looks at Israel and declares them a perverse generation, children in whom is no faithfulness.
So by adopting this specific covenantal language, Jesus is not just speaking as a frustrated middle school teacher dealing with slow learners.
No, not at all. He is adopting the divine posture. He is speaking as Yahweh incarnate, looking at a rebellious Israel. He is grieving the exact same cyclical rebellion.
The disciples had seen him calm the storm, raise the dead, and feed the 5,000.
And yet, the moment they faced an impossible demon, they abandoned dependence on him and reverted to self-reliance. The sources make a highly countercultural theological argument here regarding the nature of unbelief.
Let's talk about that, because I want to push back on this a bit. In today's world, having doubts or being a skeptic is often celebrated as being intellectual or authentic.
Yeah, deconstructing your faith is very trendy.
Right. We view unbelief as a passive, innocent struggle with the facts, but the sources are pushing back hard on that, arguing that unbelief is an active, destructive force. Jesus is treating unbelief as a crime. How do the authors reconcile this harsh rebuke with the grace Jesus is about to show?
Well, the text absolutely refuses to coddle unbelief as an innocent intellectual hurdle. The sources argue that biblical unbelief apistia is an active, hostile, and heinous sin. It is covenantal treason.
Covenantal treason, that's a strong phrase. Why?
Because it is not merely a struggle to understand God, it is a fundamental refusal to trust his character. Unbelief calls the creator of the universe a liar. It looks at the promises of God and declares them insufficient.
It's basically the root of the fall in Eden. Did God really say?
Exactly. The original sin was unbelief before it was disobedience. And that is why Jesus' righteous indignation burns so hot here. The disciples' practical atheism in the valley is deeply offensive to the holiness of God.
But if this unbelief is so deeply offensive, so treasonous, how do we reconcile the burning wrath of Eugenia Pistos with the breathtaking grace that happens in the very next second? Because Jesus doesn't walk away.
He doesn't rain down fire.
No. He issues one single authoritative command: bring him to me.
It is the ultimate pivot. Jesus redirects the entire narrative away from the theology of the scribes and the failure of the disciples, straight to the brokenness of the boy. The divine wrath against self-reliance immediately gives way to divine compassion for the helpless.
So the father brings the boy forward, and the moment the demon sees Jesus, it throws the child into a horrific convulsion. The medical and demonic terminology Mark uses here is just graphic and violent.
It really is. The text says the spirit rose him. It dashes him or slams him to the ground. He affrise, he foams at the mouth. He grinds his teeth.
And his body, serenitae, it becomes rigid, withering, or catatonic. The sources emphasize that Mark includes these gruesome details to expose the sheer malice of Satan's kingdom.
The father tells Jesus that the demon frequently throws the boy into the fire and into the water to destroy him.
That is the theological definition of demonic oppression right there. It is the active, malicious attempt to destroy the image of God in a human being.
Because the enemy cannot strike God directly, so he relentlessly assaults the image bearers.
Man, so standing over his writhing, foaming child, the father looks at Jesus. He has just watched Jesus' top delegates fail miserably. The scribes are snickering. The father's hope is practically extinguished.
He's at rock bottom.
And he utters this incredibly frail, hesitant plea. If you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us.
Itidene, if you can. It is a plea absolutely dripping with doubt. He is questioning the very capacity of the Messiah.
And Jesus immediately locks on to that specific phrase. He doesn't let the theological error slide, even in the midst of the man's profound grief.
The Greek grammatical response from Jesus here is brilliant. He takes the father's phrase, I dino, and attaches the neuter article to the front of it.
What does that do?
He essentially quotes the man's doubt back to him in quotes. The, if you can, all things are possible to one who believes.
He is basically saying, are you seriously asking if I can? You're talking to the author of life. The limitation is not on my power. The limitation is in your refusal to trust the omnipotent one.
Right. And the rebuke shatters the man's hesitation. It breaks him completely open. The father bursts into tears and screams the immortal paradox of the Christian life. I believe. Help my unbelief.
Pistush, pusemo tua pistia. It is probably the most honest prayer in the entire Bible.
Without a doubt. He declares his faith, and in the exact same breath, he confesses his absolute lack of it, begging Jesus to rescue him from his own doubt.
The sources anchor their entire theological application in this single sentence. This cry is the bedrock of Reformed soteriology, the biblical doctrine of salvation.
It obliterates the idea that faith is a meritorious work.
We really have to unpack that. Because modern prosperity teachings, the name it and claim it theology, they often say, generate enough faith and you can compel the result. They treat faith as a currency.
Or psychological force field. The teaching is that if you can just generate enough positive energy, banish all negative thoughts, and speak the right outcome into existence, God is obligated to act.
How did the sources use this passage to refute that? Because if the prosperity gospel were true, this father would have failed.
Right. He would have walked home carrying the corpse of his demonized son. His faith was a mess. It was fractured. It was laced with explicit, vocalized doubt. If the healing depended on the purity, the volume, or the intensity of the man's faith, he completely failed the test.
But he doesn't fail. He succeeds. So what does this all mean for you listening right now? It's like a drowning person grabbing a rescue rope. It's not the flawless strength of your grip that saves you. It's the unyielding strength of the rescuer holding the other end of the rope.
That's a perfect analogy. Because biblical faith is not a power you generate, it is an empty hand that receives. The power of faith does not reside in the faith itself, but entirely in the object of that faith, Jesus Christ.
The father didn't look inward to muster up more spiritual energy. He looked inward, saw a mixture of belief and devastating unbelief, and threw the entire broken mess at the feet of a sovereign Savior.
He cast himself entirely on the mercy of the king. And the king responds instantly. Jesus sees the crowd running together, and he publicly and decisively executes the exorcism.
And notice the stark contrast between Jesus and the Jewish exorcists.
Oh, it's night and day. He doesn't pull out the root of Baras. He doesn't invoke the name of Abraham or angels. He doesn't try to interrogate the demon to find out its name.
He doesn't negotiate at all.
No. He relies on his own inherent unborrowed authority. He uses the emphatic personal pronoun ego. I command you, come out of him and never enter him again.
It is an absolute sovereign decree. And the demon's reaction is explosive. It shrieks, it convulses the boy terribly, and then it departs. But the aftermath is terrifying.
The boy collapses, and Mark writes that he became, shusei nekros, as dead. The crowd literally starts murmuring, he is dead.
This is where Mark's theological brilliance really shines again. He employs specific verbs here that carry massive typological weight. Jesus takes the boy by the hand and ogeiron auton, he raised him up. And the boy anesto, he stood erect.
Eger and anastomi, those are the exact Greek verbs the New Testament uses constantly to describe resurrection.
Yes, the sources argue this entire event is thoroughly Christocentric. It's a vivid foreshadowing of the cross and the empty tomb.
Jesus is previewing exactly what he is walking toward in Jerusalem. He is going to descend into the ultimate valley of human sin and demonic condemnation. He will be swallowed by death. He will become necros.
But on the third day, he will be raised up. The healing of this boy is a micro-resurrection that validates Christ's identity as the conqueror of death.
And the sources also draw a fascinating parallel here between Jesus and Moses. We touched on Deuteronomy earlier, but the typology goes even deeper.
Think about the Exodus narrative. Moses goes up Mount Sinai, enters the glory cloud, receives the law, and then descends to find the Israelites in the valley, completely given over to the chaotic, demonic idolatry of the golden calf.
It's the exact same geographical transition, mountain glory down to valley chaos.
But look at the difference in the mediators. Moses, as a mere servant, is powerless to fix the idolatry. He shatters the tablets in anger, he grinds the calf into dust, and he can only intercede, begging God not to wipe the people out.
Jesus, on the other hand, descends the Mount of Transfiguration, encounters the demonic chaos, but he doesn't just intercede. He acts as the creator. He speaks a word, and the demonic kingdom shatters.
Jesus is the true and greater Moses, who actually possesses the inherent power to deliver his people.
He also fulfills the messianic prophecies of Isaiah in this exact moment. Isaiah 35 promises that when God comes to save, the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy.
By specifically calling out the mute and deaf spirit, Jesus is signing his work. He is leaving a theological fingerprint that says, I am the God of Isaiah 35.
Now, the authors of our sources take this cosmic messianic victory and they apply it polemically to a major debate within the modern church. They explicitly use this text to build a case for a strict cessationist framework.
Let's explore that application. Because if the sources argue that modern believers aren't supposed to be running around doing dramatic exorcisms like this, what exactly is the modern application for the everyday listener?
Well, the authors are pushing back against charismatic continuationism, specifically modern deliverance ministries. They argue that these modern practices often look much more like the superstitious, ritualistic errors of the first-century Jewish exorcists, relying on specific incantations, binding territorial spirits, seeking esoteric knowledge, than they reflect the sovereign authority of Christ.
So the cessationist argument is that these were non-repeatable messianic sign miracles. They were unique historical events designed exclusively to authenticate Jesus as the divine Son of God.
Right, and to inaugurate his kingdom. Once the New Testament was completed and the foundation of the apostles was laid, the authors argue the necessity for these specific sign gifts ceased.
So the church today is not commanded to perform magical shouting matches with demons.
That is the argument. The church is commanded to preach the gospel, administer the sacraments, and pray for the conversion of sinners. The kingdom advances through the ordinary means of grace, trusting that Christ decisively bound the strong man at the cross.
Okay, but if we aren't supposed to be doing these spectacular exorcisms, it begs a massive practical question. What are we supposed to do? When we face spiritual darkness or overwhelming life crises or systemic evil, what is our protocol?
The answer to how believers operate today is revealed in the private debriefing in the final 2 verses of the narrative. The public spectacle is over. Jesus takes the humiliated disciples into a house, away from the crowds and the scribes.
You can practically feel the shame suffocating the room. The disciples finally ask the painful question, why could we not cast it out?
They're desperate to know where their technique failed. Did they use the wrong tone of voice? Did they miss a step in the protocol?
And Jesus delivers a dogmatic decree that shatters their entire paradigm. He says this kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer.
Now, anyone following along in certain Bible translations like the King James is going to notice an extra phrase there. Verse 29 often reads, by nothing but by prayer and fasting.
Oh yeah, let's do a deep dive into the textual criticism here, because the sources dedicate significant space to this detail.
It's a fascinating detail. The Greek words kainesteia and fasting are actually absent from the earliest, most reliable Alexandrian manuscripts, such as Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus.
Wait, really? So where did it come from?
The sources assert that the phrase was a later scribal addition found in the Byzantine text tradition.
Why would a scribe add "and fasting" to the words of Jesus?
Because of the massive ascetic movement that swept through the early church. As monasticism rose, there was a growing theological assumption that extreme self-denial and physical rigor were the keys to higher spiritual power.
So a well-meaning scribe likely read this account, saw the incredible power of this specific demon, and assumed that simple prayer couldn't possibly be enough. It needed to be augmented by human effort, by fasting.
Exactly. But adding and fasting completely destroys the theological point Jesus is making. Jesus is confronting the disciples' reliance on human strength, and the scribes tried to sneak human strength right back into the text.
It is a stunning irony. The pure, singular original point Jesus makes is exclusively about prayer. And the sources use this singular focus on prayer to diagnose exactly what went wrong in the valley. The disciples' failure was a manifestation of what the authors call practical atheism.
Practical atheism. It is a terrifying concept for the church. It means you have orthodox theology on paper, you confess the right creeds, but in the trenches of actual life and ministry, you operate as if God is entirely unnecessary.
The disciples had the commission. They had the orthodox belief that demons should be cast out, but they assumed divine work could be done through human strength. They didn't pray because they didn't think they needed God to intervene.
They thought they had the situation handled, and the sources use this text to decisively refute modern church pragmatism.
They target the seeker-sensitive movement, pragmatic church growth strategies, and therapeutic moralism. The underlying philosophy of much of modern evangelicalism is basically Pelagian.
Pelagianism being the ancient heresy that teaches human beings have the inherent capacity, apart from divine grace, to choose God and achieve spiritual victory.
Right. We assume that if we just have the most highly produced worship service, the slickest marketing campaign, the most relatable demographic-tested sermon series, we can manufacture spiritual life.
We treat ministry like a corporate merger or a slick presentation, and the 9 disciples in the valley are the ultimate warning against that mindset.
They had the best resume imaginable. They had walked with Jesus. They had the experience. But they tried to execute the ministry based on their credentials, and they were publicly humiliated.
Because spiritual deadness and demonic darkness do not respond to human marketing. They do not yield to our strategic plans.
It's like trying to power a massive appliance but forgetting to plug it into the wall. You can flip the switch all day, but without the power source, you're just making noise.
I love that. The authors argue that whenever a church relies on its methods and human activism rather than absolute, desperate dependence on God, it renders itself as spiritually bankrupt and impotent as those 9 men in the dirt.
But let me press on this. Let's make sure we define what Jesus means by prayer here. Is Jesus saying prayer is a magic formula you recite right before the exorcism?
If you treat prayer as a magic spell to unlock power, you are still acting like a first-century Jewish exorcist. You are just swapping the root of baras for a spiritual incantation.
So are the sources arguing for prayer as a continuous baseline posture of existence?
Yeah. Exactly. Jesus is not prescribing prayer as a pre-game ritual. He is demanding it as a baseline posture. Prayer is the antithesis of self-reliance.
It is the ultimate confession of creaturely dependence.
Every time you genuinely pray, you are consciously declaring your own insolvency. You are saying, I am insufficient, I do not have the wisdom, the strength, or the authority to navigate this. You are God, and I am not.
The disciples failed because they stood up from the posture of prayer. They stopped being conduits and tried to act as the source.
True spiritual victory is never found in elevating our own strength or refining our techniques. It is found in embracing our total weakness and remaining tethered to the sovereign Christ.
Wow. Let's synthesize this entire journey. We started on the blinding, transcendent peak of Mount Hermon, beholding the uncreated glory of the Son of God.
And then we were dragged right down into a chaotic valley to witness the catastrophic insolvency of human power.
We saw the disciples fail because past spiritual success is no substitute for present reliance on God. We heard the terrifying covenantal wrath of God against the treason of unbelief.
Yet we watched that wrath give way to unimaginable grace when a desperate, imperfect Father cast his broken faith, his help my unbelief, onto a perfect Savior. We saw Jesus act as the true Moses, obliterating the demonic kingdom with a single word.
And finally, we learned that true spiritual victory requires abandoning Pelagian self-reliance and pragmatic gimmicks in favor of a life of dependent prayer.
The sources leave us with a profound eschatological consideration to hold all of this together. They view this passage through a premillennial framework.
The concept of the already but not yet.
Yes, Jesus decisively defeated Satan at the cross, and this exorcism in the valley was a brilliant preview of that ultimate victory. The war is won. The kingdom of God is already here, however, it is not yet fully consummated.
The enemy is a defeated foe, but we still live in the valley. We still face the chaos, the sickness, and the spiritual darkness.
The eschatological hope is that the final physical realization of Christ's victory, where every demon is banished, every disease is healed, awaits his glorious second coming.
Which brings us to the ultimate provocative thought for you to consider as we close. Think about the valley you are standing in right now, the crises you are facing.
Are you operating like those 9 defeated disciples, exhausting yourself by relying on your own intellect, your resume, your techniques, and your past successes?
Are you trying to manage the darkness with human tools? Or are you living in the confident, prayerful, dependent reality of a king who has already proven that he grew? He commands the darkness with a single word. Are you trusting your technique, or are you clinging to the king? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive on Reformed thinking. Whatever impossible situation you are staring down today, we encourage you to continually bring your unbelief to the perfect Savior. Trust that He is more than able.